Okay, so now let's talk about the dynamics of demand and supply. Now, what do I mean by the dynamics of demand and supply? Now, by the dynamics of demand and supply, I am basically referring to a change in demand. Now, if you remember from our earlier videos, that means I am referring to a demand shift, and it could be towards the right or to the left, or I am referring to a supply shift. And there is a third possibility that there is a change in both demand and supply at the same time. So that means in the first two, that is change in demand and change in supply, I am just talking about single shifts. That means it is either a change in demand or a change in supply, whereas in the third one I am basically talking about a simultaneous shift of demand or supply, right? Demand and supply. Okay, so we will go through these cases. We will first talk about changes in demand, and then we will talk about changes in supply, and then we are going to talk about simultaneous shifts. Now, if I am talking about the first two, that is change in demand and change in supply, I could really divide them into four cases. Okay, so let's say case 1, I am talking about an increase in demand. So demand increases, and you know in this class an increase is always represented by an arrow in the upward direction. So we are referring to an increase in demand. So that means we are going to talk about a right shift of the demand curve. Now you know that that increase in demand could be caused by any of the non-price factors in the market, which we call the tribe factors. Now case 2 is a decrease in demand, and once again a downward arrow in this class represents a decrease. That would be a left shift of the demand curve, and once again that could be caused by one of the tribe factors in the market. Case 3 would be on the supply side. So we are talking about an increase in supply. You're talking about a right shift of the supply curve. And finally, case 4, where we are talking about a decrease in supply, so left shift of the supply curve. So basically in these cases we are going to see what happens in the market if you have a shift of the demand or the supply curve. Now please note that in case 1, if you are talking about an increase in demand, we are assuming everything else on the supply side stays constant. Nothing else changes in the market. There is just one factor, which is an increase in demand. So let's draw our market diagram. You have quantity on the x-axis, price, which is own price, on the y-axis. We have an initial demand curve, an initial supply curve. There is an equilibrium in the market given by E. There is an equilibrium quantity, and there is an equilibrium price. Now let's say for whatever reason there is an increase in demand. Maybe the number of buyers went up in the market, or there is an increase in the price of substitute, something like that, okay, which causes a right shift of the demand curve. Please note that initially that shift of demand takes place with a constant price, because if you remember, shifts of these curves take place with the implicit assumption that price of the commodity is not changing. So let's say there is an increase in demand, which is represented by D dash. Price is not changing initially when the shift takes place. but once the shift has taken place, there is a new equilibrium established in the market, E dash, which is basically the intersection point of the existing supply curve S and the new demand curve D dash, and at that new equilibrium, please note that there has been an increase in equilibrium quantity bought and sold in the market, and at the same time there is an increase in the equilibrium price. So the impact of a demand increase with no other change in the market is an increase in equilibrium quantity bought and sold along with an increase in the equilibrium price in the market. So that's the result of a demand increase. This is for you to remember. When demand increases, equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price move in the same direction as demand, so there's an increase in both. Okay. Now let's go on to the next one. Once again, we are drawing a market diagram, and if you want, you could draw along with me on your notebook. It might be easier for you to understand. So whenever I say a market diagram, I am basically referring to this cross of demand and supply with an equilibrium point. Now let's say for whatever reason the demand in the market has gone down. Maybe the price of a complement went up, or maybe the income of the buyers went down for a normal good, something like that. Okay. So that causes a left shift of the demand curve to something like D dash. Now initially that shift takes place with a constant price, but once the shift has taken place, step 2, that means after the shift, there is a new equilibrium in the market, something like E dash, and as a result of that, there is a lower quantity now bought and sold in the market, obviously because demand has gone down, but at the same time, there is also a decrease in the price in the market. So the effect of a demand decrease in the market is a lower equilibrium quantity and a lower equilibrium price. Now that is for you to remember, because when we go on to application questions, problems, you will be applying these. So please remember, a demand increase increases equilibrium quantity and price. A demand decrease always decreases the equilibrium quantity and price. Now let's move on to the supply side. Now once again, let's draw a market diagram. We always draw a lot of graphs in econ. So if you are practicing the graphs at home, it might be worthwhile to buy some colored pens and use those different colored pens. It always helps to understand these shifts. Okay, so we have two market diagrams ready. Now please note that here we are referring to an increase in supply with nothing else changing in the market. That means there is no change on the demand side, just there is an increase in supply. So you know that this increase in supply could be caused by any of our supply factors, supply shifting factors like the ties factors. Maybe the input price has gone down, or maybe there has been a technological improvement, or maybe there has been more sellers in the market, something like that. Okay, so if the supply goes up, then initially the price is constant, but as a result of the, I worked with the demand curve. That's a mistake. Okay. If we have an increase in supply with no change on the demand side, then the supply curve moves to the right, because you know that any increase in demand or supply is always a right shift. So initially the price is the same, but after the shift there is a new equilibrium established in the market, and at this new equilibrium there is a higher quantity bought and sold, higher equilibrium quantity because now the supply is higher, but at the same time there is also a decrease in the market price. Okay, so the result of a supply increase on the market when nothing changes on the demand side is an increase in equilibrium quantity and a decrease in the equilibrium price. Now if the opposite happened, if there was a decrease in supply, maybe the number of sellers went down, or maybe input price has now become expensive, or maybe the sellers are expecting the price to be higher in the future, some condition like that which takes the supply down. Then initially the price is constant, but after the shift you have a new equilibrium, and at this new equilibrium the market experiences a higher equilibrium price and a lower equilibrium quantity bought and sold. So that is the impact of a supply decrease, that the equilibrium price is higher but the equilibrium quantity bought and sold in the market is lower, right? So this is for you to remember. Now please note that on the demand side it is easy, because as demand increases both increase, as demand decreases both decrease. But on the supply side, as supply increases, quantity increases but price decreases, and as supply goes down, quantity decreases, price goes up. So on the supply side, equilibrium quantity takes the same direction as the demand, but as the supply, but the equilibrium price always takes the opposite direction. Now these four cases will be extremely important for you to remember. Now in the next video we are going to talk about simultaneous shifts. So we are going to talk about change in demand and change in supply at the same time. Now when we draw the simultaneous shifts, I want to remind you that it might be a good idea not to do those application questions about simultaneous shifts by drawing graphs, because the graphs will give us very confusing picture. It might be easier to do them intuitively rather than drawing the graph, and I will show you exactly what I mean in the next video.